Okay. We're going to start with Basar B'Cholov, but before we actually get into the Shulchan Aruch and some of the details of the halachas and the Sekalim, etc., I want to just go through a little bit of a background, some information that it's important to know just as a hakdama. Some of you may have learned this and may know a little bit, but we'll just go through Al HaSeder. Generally speaking, we know the halachas come. Teresh B'Al Peh was recorded by the Yehuda Nasi in the Mishnah, and eventually in the Gemara comes with all the bottom line maskana lahalacha. Nevertheless, the Gemara itself is there's a machlokes rishonim on how to learn pshat in the Gemara, who to paskin like in the Gemara, and therefore there can be a machlokes harishonim in halacha based on how you learn pshat in the Gemara. And that's basically, for many years, the oifen, hapsak halacha, came based on how the Rishonim either learned pshat in the Gemara or followed one or the other of the shittas in the Gemara. So, for example, Rashi learns pshat in the Gemara one way, the halacha according to Rashi is one way. Taisvis learns a little bit different, the Rashba, etc. That's how halacha came, and that's basically all in the format of the Gemara. But as we know, the first one to revolutionize that Seder was the Rambam. The Rambam said that because the Gemara, there's halachas here, mefuzares in one place or the other, not all the halachas of Shabbos are in Shabbos, so the Rambam compiled it in a new Seder, Mishnah Torah. But that was not the norm oifen of halacha. Nevertheless, there were still Rishonim who were learning the Gemara and paskin based on the Gemara. For example, the Rif. The Rif is al HaSeder of the Gemara. He just takes out a tamsis. He takes out a maskana of the Gemara as we find at the back of the Gemara. The Rosh brings the halachas, but it's all in the format of the Gemara, al HaSeder of the Gemara, and that's what we have the Rashba, and all the Rishonim, how they paskin is based on the Gemara. The first one, or not the first, but the later one, who actually, the end of the Rishonim, was the Tur. He made a whole new Seder, and basically from then on, from the Tur, the format in where we have halacha has been changed, not so much from the Gemara. We don't really, based on the Gemara, but the way we learn it is not that we go back to the Gemara and learn the Gemara, but we learn it as halacha. The Tur did, the Baal HaTurim, he was the son of the Rosh, the end of the Rishonim, and he wrote a sefer called Arba HaTurim. He also wrote, I'm sure you're familiar with a sefer Pirush on Chumash known as the Baal HaTurim. It's called Baal HaTurim because he wrote the sefer Arba HaTurim. And he wrote a Pirush on Chumash. The Arba HaTurim were 4 sections, 4 chalakim, Eirachayim on daily halachas, davening, Bechas HaShachar, etc., as well as Shabbos, Yontiv, Dvarim that come al HaSeder, Yeredeya is Isur V'Heter, Mikveh, all other Isurim, Shatnez and Yayin Nesach and Hechsher Kalim, as well as Pidyon Petach Hamad. All these Inyanim and Halacha, Isur V'Heter are all in the Chelek of Yeredeya. Even Ezer is related to Chasana, Chuppah, Kedushin, Ksubas, and also Choshen Mishpat, which is Dayanim, more Dinim Mamanis. So that's how the Tur wrote his Sefer. The Tur himself compiled, brought down not only one shita, he brought down a number of shitas. In most cases, he follows the shita of his father, the Rosh. Not in all cases, but in most cases he'll bring the Rosh, usually agrees with his father of the Rosh, but he brings from the Rambam, he brings from the Smak, he brings from the Maharam, different Rishonim that he brings the different shittas. That's what it was, basically, the new Sefer HaYesoid of Halacha was from the Torah. However, a little bit, a few hundred years later, 200 years later, the Beis Yosef came. Who was the Beis Yosef? Yosef Cairo was, he wrote a Pirush on the Torah. He found the Torah to be very good. He actually, it says the Beis Yosef wanted to write his own Sefer before even the Torah, but he found that the Torah did a good job, I guess, in the Seder HaDvarim, but he wanted to elaborate, bring more other shittas, bring the Mitzvah Kodesh and the Gemara. And the Beis Yosef Cairo wrote a Sefer called Beis Yosef on the Torah. By the way, he also wrote another Sefer called Kesef Mishnah, which I'm sure you've heard of on the Rambam. But he wrote a Sefer Beis Yosef on the Torah, bringing in other shittas as well, but clarifying the Mekoidas of the dinim of the Torah. A little while later, another Pirush on the Torah was written by the B'yoel Sirkis, the Bach, known as the Bach, the Beis Chadash. Came after the Beis Yosef, and often he argues in the Beis Yosef. We're not going to learn so much the Bach. In some cases we will learn it, so we're not going to get into too many details of the Bach was often Kroka, as we'll see his relationship soon, the other Nersikim that we learn. Those are the two main Pirushim on the Torah. We also have the Prisha and the Visha, which is the same one who wrote a Pirush, the Sma on Even Ezer. Basically explaining the Beis Yosef. In addition to that, the Beis Yosef Cairo wrote another Sefer. After he finished writing the Pirush on the Torah, he realized that although he contributed and he explained and elaborated much on the Torah, nevertheless it lacked some straightforwardness in halacha. It's very elaborate, and therefore he felt that he has to write another sefer which would be clear cut, straight halacha lamaisa, which everyone can follow. And then he wrote a sefer called Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch Kishmoi Kenhu, as it's called, a set table. He wrote halachas, very little pirushim, or very little taimim, reasons. It's basically halachas he took from the Torah, he took from his own Sefer Beis Yosef, the maskonas, whatever he felt the maskona was, he wrote in a Sefer called Shulchan Aruch. B'derech klal, he followed the shita of Reiv Deyas between the Rosh, the Rif, and the Rambam. And the 2 out of 3 of the shitas he paskin la halacha. So he wrote a sefer called Shulchan Aruch. Yosef Kaida Beis Yosef was really a Sephardi. He lived in Eretz Yisrael, in Tzfas. He came from Sfard. However, in the other part of the world, in Europe, there was developing also poskim and halachas, and certain minhagim which the Beis Yosef himself did not follow. Other minhagim which other kehilas in Europe followed differently than the Beis Yosef. And therefore, what came along was the Ramah. The Moshe Isserlis, which is the Mashatevis Ramah, and he added, so to speak, to the Mechaber, to the Shulchan Aruch, to the Beis Yosef, he added different minhagim, different psukim that are slightly different than the Beis Yosef. And he wrote a sefer called Darkei Moshe. Darkei Moshe is a Hisafa on the Beis Yosef, on the Torah. And he also wrote a sefer called, he wrote Haggai's, notes on the Shulchan Aruch. If you see in the Shulchan Aruch, you'll see Haggah. The Haggah is from the Ramah, and it's otherwise referred to as the Mappa, the tablecloth. Shulchan Beis Yosef wrote a Shulchan Aruch. The Mechaber is a Shulchan Aruch. On top of that, he added a cover, a Mappa, where he inserts in different places either extra halachas that the Mechaber didn't bring down, or Amal, he will argue on the Mechaber, and based on the minhagim of the poskim from Eastern Europe, from Ashkenaz. Taka, therefore, there are different minhagim and different halachas we follow that the Ashkenazim follow and the Sfardim follow differently. The Sfardim follow the Mechaber, and Ashkenazim, we are Ashkenazim, we follow the Psukim of the Ramah. As always, the Torah continues, and this also left room for debate, as always, and we have, even on the Shulchan Aruch, there were other Neisei Kelim, other poskim that came along and wrote Pirushim, either agreeing or not agreeing, explaining the different shittas of the Mechaber and the Ramah. The Ramah, again, did not rewrite the Shulchan Aruch. The Ramah just added Hagois to the Shulchan Aruch. This was done on all Daled Chelkei Shulchan Aruch. And I might add as follows. The Mechaber, when he wrote over the Shulchan Aruch, he kept exactly the Seder of the Simonim as the way the Torah wrote 4 Svarim, basically, Arba Turin, divided into Simonim. Each one starts over from the number, from the beginning, from Aleph. And Yeredeya, for example, the Chashchita, Siman Aleph starts off with Hilchos Shchita. Exactly the same halachas in Siman Aleph of Tur is the same thing as Siman Aleph in Shulchan Aruch. The difference is that the Tur, by the way, when he wrote the Tur, he only wrote Simanim. He did not divide the Siman into Seifim. In the later prints today, in the new print that we have, they added the Seifim based on the Shulchan Aruch, the Mechaber Seifim, but Be'emes, the Tur himself never divided the Siman into Seifim. He wrote a Siman. The Mechaber, when he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, he kept exactly the same Simanim, but he divided into Seifim as well. The Ramah added the Hagois, and on this, and on the Daled Chelkei Shulchan Aruch, there are different popular Neisei Kelim. I'll start with the Taz, because the Taz wrote Be'emes a Pirush on all of the 4 Chalakim, whereas, as we'll see in the Shach, only, or basically only wrote on Yeredeya. The Taz is the Turei Zav. He wrote a Pirush on all the Chalakim of Shulchan Aruch. The most famous is for Eira Chaim and Yeredeya. Eira Chaim is called Turei Zav, Magen David, his name was David Halevi. And he wrote a Pirush on Eira Chaim, and then he wrote another Pirush on Yeredeya called Turei Zav. That is the pasuk in Shir Hashirim that says Turei Zav is spelled with a Taf, but nevertheless, he wrote it with a Tes, Turei Zav. We also have a Pirush of the Shach. The Shach is, his name was Shapsi HaKoyen, and he wrote a Pirush called Sifsei Koyen. The pasuk says, Sifsei Koyen Yishmeru Das. So he was a Koyen, he wrote a Pirush on the Shulchan Aruch called Sifsei Koyen. The way it's divided is divided in Sif Koton. Also notes, I guess you can call them like Ha'ares, that it would be, letters or numbers to match up, but therefore it's referred to as Sif Koton. Shach and Taz basically did the same kind of work, although they did not see each other's work. They lived the same tkufa, but they did not see each other's work before they wrote it. After they wrote it, the Shach saw the Taz's Pirush, and he wrote a sefer in a number of places against the Shach, against the Taz, called Nekudas HaKesef, where in some places the Taz even answers back, and the Shach even answers back with the Daf Achrein and the Kuntres Achrein. The Taz answers sometimes back with the Daf Achrein, and the Shach answers back with the Kuntres Achrein. But that's in very, rare cases. The Nekudas HaKesef is not so rare. Now, in addition to the Shach and the Taz, there was, as time goes on, there was another Pirush written on the Shach and Taz, which is also Negeya to know, and that is the Pri Megadim. Pri Megadim wrote many, many Svarim, but what's Negeya for us over here is he wrote I don't know if you want to call it a Pirush, on every single Sif Katan of the Shach and every single Sif Katan of the Taz. He wrote a Ha'ara, a more longer. He agrees, he disagrees, he elaborates, and that's how, his format is also based on the format of the Shach and Taz. He wrote a Pirush on the Shach called Sifsei Das, based on the pasuk I said before, Sifsei Koyin Yishmenu Das, and he also wrote a Pirush on the Taz called Mishpatzei Zav, on the Taz. So every single Sif Katan that there is in the Shach and Taz is also a Pri Megadim on it. And the numbers are also exactly the same. So if you have a Shach Sif Katan Tes, you also have a Pri Megadim Sif Seidas Sif Katan Tes. It goes hand in hand. Who do we follow L'Halacha? Obviously, the proper way to learn, and we're going to do that as well. We'll start with the Tur. We'll learn the Tur, which gives us the Yisoid Hadvarim. We'll try and do as much as we can of the Beis Yosef, where it gives us the Mekoides of the different halachas. And then we go to the Mechaber, where he spells it out in simple language, the halacha, this is what you do, this is how you do it, with the Mechaber and the Ramah. And then we spend more time on the Shach and Taz, where they elaborate and explain the different inyonim, the different halachas that we find in the Shulchan Aruch. Let me repeat again. La halacha, we as Ashkenazim follow the Ramah, and Svardim follow the Mechaber. Doesn't mean that we can only learn the Ramah. We have to learn the Ramah because the Ramah didn't write. We have to learn the Mechaber because the Ramah didn't write his own Shulchan Aruch. We have to follow it together with the Mechaber. And also, not everybody in the world are Ashkenazim. Faran, Svardim also of the Welt. And if we want to know halacha, getting Semicha, you have to be able to paskin. You have to know even what the halacha is for the Svardim. When it comes to the Shach and Taz and the Pri Megadim, there again also b'derech klal, and I don't know that it's in every single case, but b'derech klal we will follow the Basra, halacha ke Basra. So however the hachra of the Pri Megadim is, we will follow that as well. But in terms of the Shach and the Taz, they are both Ashkenazim, and they also follow the Ramah. But if there's an argument, they'll argue with the Ramah, so then it depends. Obviously, every single case is separate, and we'll learn it. We'll go through the Psak Din Lapoyo. But Ba'ifin Klali, if I could say it, is if the Shach and Taz, or Shach and Taz argue, but Derech Klal will follow the Shach. Also, if they argue on the Ramah, it would depend. If they quote the Ramah and they number one, we will go l'chumra. Usually we'll take the shita which is more chomer, unless the shita which is more mekel, to the Shach quotes the Ramah. And he's mekel on the Ramah. But he explains why you don't have to listen to the Ramah, why the halacha is l'kula. Then we will follow the kula, because it's clearly the Basra, the later poskim, the Shach later on explains clearly why we can be mekel. But if it's just a regular machloikas, different shitas, we will b'derech klal take the shita which is more machmer, unless, again, I don't want this. This is b'derech klal, not in every single case. As we continue, as we learn, we'll try and point out in different places what the halacha will be. Just to mention one or two more things, when it get to the machloikas, the Mechaber and Ramah, we follow the Ramah. Is the Ramah usually more machmer, or is it usually more mekel? Are Sfardim more machmer, or are the Ashkenazim more machmer? So it's hard to answer that directly. B'derech klal, the Ramah is machmer, or at least in certain key situations, the Ramah is taken more machmer than the Mechaber. But in many cases, that's only, as he says, v'chein noyagin or minhag Ashkenaz, and in some cases he will be mekel b'makom hefsed meruba. Some of the Sfardim make fun of the Ashkenazim that hefsed meruba. If it's a big loss, if you're losing money, so the halacha changes. It's not the pshat. Pshat is that la halacha we're mekel, but we do find that la halacha, the real halacha is that we're mekel. But then the minig is to be machmer. So the hefsed meruba we're mekel, but b'derech klal the Ramah is more machmer. You do find in a number of places where the Ramah is mekel on the machaber, as we'll see as we go along, where those circumstances are, obviously. So that's the general Seder, from the Tur with the Noisei Kelim, to the Shulchan Aruch with the Noisei Kelim. But Hayosta, we're just starting now, so I want to just go through some of the earlier Rishonim and Achronim that are quoted by the Shulchan Aruch, because we're going to spend some time learning the Shulchan Aruch, obviously, to be familiar and recognize some of the names that we're going to be learning, to be able to put things into proper Seder. Like I said before, the Rishonim paskin based on the Gemara, or not, obviously everyone paskin based on the Gemara, but the format in where they wrote their halacha was based on the Gemara. But that's not entirely true in that sense. There are obviously other svarim that the Rishonim wrote that are halacha as well. For example, a sefer which is quoted all over in Beis Yosef, and even in the Tur quotes the Rashba. The Rashba wrote a sefer called Tedos Habayis, which is an independent sefer of halacha. He wrote also Chidushei Rashba, as we know in the Gemara. But in addition, he also wrote a sefer called Tedos Habayis, which is a sefer of halacha. He wrote it actually in two formats, Tedos Habayis Ha'aruch and Tedos Habayis HaKotzer. First in a more lengthy way, with all the arichas and the pilpulim and the biyurim, etc. And he also wrote it also in the tamtzis with a short version of the halacha, Tedos Habayis HaKotzer. The Tur actually quotes the Rashba in a number of places. Kosser b'Tedos Habayis, as it says in Sefer Tedos Habayis. That's usually the Tedos Habayis HaKotzer. The Tur didn't really see the Tedos Habayis Aruch. However, the Rashba's Sefer Tedos Habayis is not without controversy. The Rashba there was a Sefer written by the Ra'ah called Bedek Habayis. Tedos Habayis means the house. Bedek Habayis is fixing the house, and he argued in a number of places, and he wrote a Sefer Bedek Habayis criticizing or arguing with the Rashba on different halachas. They all lived at the same time as the Rashba, and the Rashba actually saw the Sefer Bedek Habayis, and he wrote another Sefer to counter the the Bedek Habayis. It's called Mishmeres Habayis, to protect his house. So we have the Tedos Habayis, Bedek Habayis, and Mishmeres Habayis are all one system. Tedos Habayis, Mishmeres Habayis from the Rashba, and the Bedek Habayis is from the Ra'ah. Not to confuse it, by the way, with another Bedek Habayis, as we mentioned before, the base of Cairo would have said a Beis Yosef, the house of Yosef. And later on, he made some Hagois on his own Sefer, Beis Yosef, and those Hagois he called Bedek Habayis. So you can see sometimes in a few places in the Torah, the Beis Yosef, Bedek Habayis. It's not the same Bedek Habayis written by the Ra'ah. But the Rashba's Bedek Habayis is quoted throughout the Shach and the Taz and all over. So you'll see Tedos Habayis, Tedos Habayis Aruch, Tedos Habayis HaKotzer. That's an important sefer to be familiar with. Another sefer that's quoted is the Smak or the Smag, Goy Smak, just to mention briefly. The Tur brings Kosov is Sefer Mitzvahs. Sefer Mitzvahs is not the Rambam Sefer Mitzvahs. It's a different Sefer Mitzvahs. Sefer Mitzvahs Godla was written by a Rishon named Moshe Mikutzi, and his Talmud the Ri Mikorbil, the Yitzchak Mikorbil, the Ri Mikorbil, he wrote a sefer called Sefer Mitzvahs Cotton. He took the general Sefer Mitzvahs Gadol and he made it in a shorter version and a more clear cut. He also did not write on any mitzvahs that are not negei b'zman hazeh, but he made a call Sefer Mitzvahs Cotton. So it's b'derech klal, those mitzvahs that there is a Sefer Mitzvahs Cotton is b'derech klal the same as the Smag, but it was just written in a shorter version. The Torah quotes the Sefer Mitzvahs. Now, on the Sefer Mitzvahs, there was also Hagois from Rabbeinu Peretz called Hagois Smak. It was written a little bit later. It's Hagois on the Smak. A Talmud of the Ri Mikorbil, Rabbeinu Peretz, he wrote a sefer called Sefer but Hagois on the Smak. The Torah also brings the Maram Rothenburg in many places. Very famous story that he was arrested, he was in jail, as you I'm sure know. I'm not going into all the history, but he was also one of the leading Rishonim, which the Torah quotes. Another sefer that's quoted is Sefer Shari Dura. It was written by also a Rishon, Rabbeinu Yitzchak Midura, and that's called Shari Dura because it was written with Sha'arim in different sections referred to as Sha'arim. So throughout the Shach and the Taz, you will find quoting very often Shari Dura. Some achronim also that are quoted by the Shach and Taz. The Shach and Taz lived, about 300-400 years ago. The famous story with the Shach from Exodus Tachvatat, so it's about 350, 375 years ago or so. But there are other achronim that were living be'erech in the same time as the Beis Yosef, which the Beis Yosef does not quote, but the Shach and Taz would quote. For example, the Marai Isolin, he wrote a sefer called Trumas Hadeshen, and he also wrote Hagois on the Shari Dura. So mentioned before, the Shari Dura, when it says Hagois Shari Dura, it's B'derech Klal. Others that wrote Hagois as well, but B'derech Klal, it'll be from the Maharai, but he also wrote his own sefer called Trumas Hadeshen. Called it Trumas Hadeshen, I believe, because it's Dalit Shinun Deshen is 354. I think that's how many sections, or how many prokim, or whatever he had in the sefer. Not to be confused with another sefer called Sefer HaTruma. Not Trumas Hadeshen, Sefer HaTruma. Sefer HaTruma was written by a Rishon as well, Rabbeinu Baruch, which is quoted in some places as well. That's a Rishon from the Achronim, but Trumas Hadeshen was a little bit later. Also, the Isra V'Heter Aruch. The Isra V'Heter Aruch was written by a Rabbeinu Yoina, not the Rabbeinu Yoina that were the very famous Rabbeinu Yoina who was from the Rishonim, but a different Rabbeinu Yoina who was a Talmud of the Maharais. He was from the Achronim, but he was a source. He wrote a Sefer Isra V'Heter. It's almost like, an independent Shulchan Aruch, not a pirush on any other Shulchan Aruch from before. And this is very much the yesod, I might say, for the Ramah. Most of the Ramah's psakim that he brings in the Hagois come from the Isra V'Heter Aruch. You can see it all the time. He quotes from the Isra V'Heter Aruch. And in fact, in some places, the Shach has a kasha. If the Isra V'Heter Pasna, why didn't the Ramah bring it? Because the Ramah passed like the Isra V'Heter Aruch. It was a Talmud of the Marai. There's also Hagois on the Isra V'Heter, which is printed in the back. I'm not sure who wrote them. It's referred to as the Hagois on the Isra V'Heter. Another one of the Rishonim that is always quoted is the Levush. The Levush his name was Mordechai Yafe, and he wrote many svarim based on the pasuk in the Megillah. Mordechai Yatsa B'Levush Malchus Tchelos V'Chur. So he wrote different svarim with the names of the different items in that pasuk. The most famous one, or at least the most negaya that we're going to find over here, is the Ateres Zahav. Papa says Ateres Zahav G'dayla. So he wrote a sefer Levush Ateres Zahav, but he's referred to as the Levush, or Sefer HaLevushim. But here it's the Levush in Ateres Zahav. He was a little bit later than the Trumas Hadesha and the Marai, before the Shach and Taz, more, probably in the same, a little bit after the Beis Yosef, that he also wrote it, which, by the way, he was the one that rewrote, so to speak, a Shulchan Aruch. Once the Shulchan Aruch was compiled, all the other poskim that paskined anything is all based on the format of the Shulchan Aruch. All the Achronim, Shach and Taz, everything is on the Shulchan Aruch, a pirush on the Shulchan Aruch. You can look on the pages, the Gra, the Kivek, everything is on the Shulchan Aruch, and he has a kasha, a teretz, he agrees, he argues. That could be. The Levush, he wrote up his own Shulchan Aruch. I guess this was until the Alter Rebbe was Mechadish, a new Shulchan Aruch, as Kedua the Sipah with the Magid. Another one of the Achronim, also from Be'erech, that Tkuf, a little bit after the Beis Yosef, is the Marshal, the Shlomo Luria. He wrote also different Svarim. If you learn Gemara and the Marshal in the back, you find all the Gemara on the bottom of the Marshal is Chochmas Shlomo. He also wrote a Pirush on Gemara called the Yam Shel Shlomo. But he also wrote a Sefer Isser V'Heter. Other names before, but it's referred to here as the Isser V'Heter Shel Marshal, not to be confused with the Isser V'Heter that we mentioned recently, Isser V'Heter Aruch. See, this is the Isser V'Heter of the Marshal, which is also quoted very often in the Shach and Taz as Besifroi Isser V'Heter Shaloi. Besifroi is usually the Yam Shel Shleima, his Pirush on the Gemara. And then in his Sefer, which he wrote later on, I guess of Halacha, not on the Gemara, is referred to as Isser V'Heter of the Marshal. I might add, the Marshal in many places will have a very different outlook, a different psak din, sometimes radical, either more machmer or more megal, but nevertheless it's brought in Halacha. We don't always pass like the Marshal, but nevertheless, the Marshal is very often quoted as a shita. I'm sure there are many more Noisa Kalim, and there are many more shitas and Shayim and Achrim that are quoted. As we go through, we'll get familiar with more and more. Let me say one more important point. That Ramah, I should have mentioned this earlier, that Ramah wrote another sefer. In addition to what we said before, he wrote Darkei Moshe on the Beis Yosef and the Torah, and the Mappa on the Shulchan Aruch, the Hagoyis and the Shulchan Aruch. He also wrote an independent sefer of Halacha called Teiras Chatas. Quite lengthier pilpulim. There are pirushim on the Teiras Chatas, but the Teiras Chatas was written also by the Ramah. There he quotes the Isser V'Heter, as I mentioned before, very often. So a lot of times the Shach and the Taz will compare the Ramah's psakim in the Hagoyis, in the Shulchan Aruch, based on his psakim in the Teiras Chatas. They should match. They should be the same halacha. Sometimes we have a little shaila, a little issue about that, but then a klal, the Ramah, what he paskins in Teiras Chatas, based on the Isser V'Heter and others, will also be found in the Shulchan Aruch. But remember, when you see in the Shach or the Taz that it says Teiras Chatas, you gotta keep in mind that Teiras Chatas is not it's different sefer. It's the same shita, or it's supposed to be at least the same shita as the Ramah. So these names, when you know that they wrote the different Yishayim Achronim wrote more than one sefer, you have to remember, put it into perspective, keep in mind that it has to go in the same shita. So just to recap quickly, that Ramah wrote the Darkei Moshe the Hagois and Teiras Chatas. Beis Yosef wrote a Shulchan Aruch. Sefer Beis Yosef, he also wrote Kesef Mishnah on the Rambam, which is quoted a few times, as we're going to learn. I mentioned before Teiras Abayis, the Rash for Teiras Abayis and Mishmeres Abayis. And the Ra'ah wrote Bedek Abayis to argue with Teiras Abayis. Also, as I mentioned before, remember to compare the Svarim. Shach, when he saw the Pirush of the Taz, he wrote Ha'ares, he argued on him, he wrote a Sefer, if you will, called the Kudas HaKesef. It's printed in the Sefer as well. So the Kudas HaKesef and the Shach is the same person. So often, actually, the Kudas HaKesef will write Kein Kosafti B'Shach or Ayin Shach Sivkot this, and you'll see that usually he says Ze'enoi Kivisha Kasafti B'Shach Sivkot, whatever he quotes, because the Shach argue with the Taz. So it's always important to remember that they must go hand in hand. I think we'll stop over here, and as we go along, as we continue learning, I'm sure we'll come across other Rishonim Achreinim, and we'll try to put them in their proper order. Ad kan.